The Creative Psychotherapist is the official podcast of the Creative Clinicians Corner, a practice-building resource for creative psychotherapists. TCP Podcast is the cast for creative, expressive, and experiential-focused psychotherapists curious to learn how to design, build, and scale a thriving private practice. Your host, Raina Lombardi, interviews successful therapists about the tools and strategies they have used to develop creative-focused practices. They also talk about the products, services, and side hustles they have developed using their knowledge and creativity to enhance their therapy practices, make a greater impact in their communities, and diversify their income streams. Welcome. Now here's your host, Raina Lombardi. Welcome. Today's guest is Robyn Gobbel or Gobbel?
Gobbel.
Yeah. And she's a licensed social worker, licensed clinical social worker, and then LMSW. I'm assuming that is another acronym, but I'm not familiar with the M.
So I just relocated to a new state that their highest social work license is licensed master's social worker. They don't have the delineation of licensed clinical social worker here.
Okay.
And so I'm licensed in 2 states and they happen to have different acronyms. So I have to use both.
Okay, excellent.
Yeah.
So I wasn't sure. I didn't want to say something that I didn't know.
Yeah.
And of course, where I'm at in Florida, it's licensed clinical social worker. So I'm not
right. That's where it is most places. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And you're a registered play therapy supervisor with over 15 years of experience in practice in family and play therapy, specializing in complex trauma, attachment, and adoption. You're a therapist, trainer, and consultant who recently relocated to Grand Rapids, Michigan from Austin, Texas. Wow, what a big move.
Yeah.
And Robyn's diverse clinical training includes EMDR, specifically adapted for children with attachment trauma, somatic experiencing, theraplay, trust-based relational intervention, Circle of Security parent educator, the Alert program, and Yoga Putics aerial yoga level 1 teacher training. Oh, that was a mouthful.
That was a mouthful.
And you've integrated all of these modalities with a foundation of attachment theory and relational neurosciences to create an attachment-rich, sensory-sensitive, and relational neurosciences supported healing environment for children and families. You consult, teach, and train extensively throughout the U.S., including as an instructor for the Foundations of Interpersonal Neurobiology at Portland Community College, and with the Adoptive and Foster Family Therapy Postgraduate Certificate Program offered by Portland State University and Oregon's Department of Human Services. And you've recently joined the board of the Global Association for Interpersonal Neurobiology Studies, called GAINS. Wow, you come with quite a background, lots and lots of education and training, and I'm sure you do amazing work with your clients.
Thank you.
Their wealth of knowledge.
Yeah, it's fun. It's really fun.
So obviously you said you just relocated.
Yeah.
Are you practicing in both states now? Or are you just practicing in Grand Rapids?
So when I say just relocated, like I really mean just, like it's been in the last couple months that I closed my practice in Austin where I have full-time private practice, almost all kids and families, complex trauma. And we made the decision to move to West Michigan, which we did this summer. So the summer of 2019, just a couple months ago at the time we're recording. And so what I'm doing presently, I just finally got my license. That took a whole lot of poops and jumps and cartwheels and all that good stuff to get. And so what I'm doing currently is really focusing on my teaching and training and consulting portion of my work. I'm absolutely going to return to clinical practice. The timeline's just a little up in the air.
Sure. Well, that's a lot that's a lot of changes to renegotiate and start.
Yep. Yeah, we're really focusing on just settling and letting life sort of calm and, find a new routine. And then, I'll eventually start to add the clinical work back in. Mm-hmm.
Excellent.
Yeah.
So what does being a creative psychotherapist mean to you?
Well, I spent some time thinking about that to, in preparation for today. And I really have two answers, although one is certainly more kind of the direction we're going to take in our conversation here today. But I think it's really, it matters to me a lot to just say the other piece, which is, creativity is almost like limitless to me, bound, like it hardly has a definition, right? And I think all really great therapists are creative, no matter what their modality is, right? We don't have to be using like art or sand or some, quote unquote, creative expression that we think of when we think of creativity, right? That
I totally agree.
Yeah, that when we're really in that space of being so present, so connected, and so attuned to our clients, that journey is creative, right? It's like in every moment, I have no idea what the next step or what the next moment is going to be, which is just in some ways the scariest part of psychotherapy, but certainly also like my most favorite part of psychotherapy. And it is one of my primary area of interest when I think about training therapists, is helping them really feel comfortable and confident to enter into that space where they can use all their knowledge and their theory and their protocols and their this and their that, but also use it in a way that allows them to be creative in every single unfolding moment. So that's like big picture creative to me. And, I absolutely believe all therapists are, being creative regardless of their modality. But for me, in the way that I express some of that creativity, particularly in the therapy room, and I work mostly with kids, is that I love to bring in and use movement in the play therapy room, which is creative because it allows us to be creative with our bodies, but it's also creative in that there's not a whole lot of other therapists really doing therapy in this way. So it feels creative in that way too.
Yeah. Most definitely.
Yeah.
And so in your practice currently, how would you say you've been able to use your creative spirit to design the build out of your practice? Because in our conversation leading up, you're really talking about some unique aspects in how you designed your space to help facilitate all of that movement in the therapy room.
Yeah. Well, so again, I work almost exclusively with kids with complex trauma. And what I discovered when I started practicing, especially like exclusively with that population, which was about 10 years ago, all the training that I had to work with kids in like a more traditional play therapy modality, it felt like it wasn't supporting me in the work that I was doing with these like most intensely dysregulated kids. 10 years later, I'm so open to the fact that I just wasn't very good at it at the time. And that's why it wasn't feeling, very accessible or useful to me. But regardless of why, the training that I had to be a more like just traditional child-centered play therapist with open shelves of toys that, were going to support kids, like metaphorical and symbolic kind of expression. It just wasn't working for me. I was consistently overwhelmed. The room was chaotic. The room was a disaster. Kids were so dysregulated. Toys were everything. It didn't feel helpful at all. And so I just really went searching for some explanation of like what I was doing wrong or what I needed to do different that would be more helpful. And, super blessed to have a ton of, fantastic mentors and teachers along the way. But ultimately, I came across the work of Dr. Bruce Perry, who has written, the book, it sounds like you're familiar with that book, The Boy Who Was Raised as a Dog. And that was at least the first literature I had run across, it really talks about being with kids in
Mm-hmm.
a therapeutic way that wasn't like projective or symbolic, kind of metaphorical play with toys. And it's like sometimes things just click, right? And I'm reading and I'm like, yes, 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 this is it. And so Perry, for those of our listeners who are maybe not familiar with him, he developed well, his research really helped us understand the neurosequential development of the brain, and that kids with complex trauma or early trauma, in utero trauma, pre-verbal trauma, that part of the brain that's been impacted or injured is like their lowest, most survival reptilian brainstem regulatory parts of the brain.
Right.
And Perry asserts that like more traditional play therapy, while a completely wonderful model and intervention for children, isn't exactly getting at those lowest parts of the brain.
Mm-hmm.
And he talks about really using the words that he uses are rhythmic, repetitive, relational, somatosensory. So involving your body, there's a rhythm to it. It's, back and forth. It's really experiential, right?
Yeah.
So the therapy is in the moment, like the experience that's happening between the two people and what the child's experiencing, as opposed to, metaphorical or insight oriented.
Right.
And that through these experiences, the rhythmic, repetitive, relational, somatosensory, with an emphasis on the relational piece,
Right.
which for
We're
me is
together.
exactly.
Yeah.
And for me, that's where I lean into like my therapist skills, as opposed to, different other professionals who are also working with kids and with their bodies, or,
Mm-hmm.
and wonderful adjunct, extremely important, experiences for kids. But it's that relational piece that I think as therapists, we're so, it's just so natural for us to stay in that real relational realm.
Yes.
But and movement isn't the only way to do rhythmic, repetitive, relational, somatosensory play. It's just the way that really, really speaks to me.
But I think that's really important as the therapist,
Yeah.
understanding what speaks to us, because when it speaks to us and we're connected and
Yeah.
immersed in it,
Yep.
that's when we can facilitate the best with the client.
Yes.
You know,
Absolutely.
there's so many different approaches because we need different approaches.
Yeah.
We're all different and we're
Yeah.
all going
Yeah.
to click in a different way. So,
Yep. Yep. We're all different as therapists. Our clients are all different. And, and again, those words apply to so many modalities, and other modalities I use too, like art and sand and all that kind of good stuff. But it is like, it's the movement piece that really sparks my energy and excitement and creativity, and where I have, had to be kind of brave about, so how do I bring this into the therapy office, especially when I'm surrounded by play therapists who, have, shelves and shelves and shelves full of figures and dolls and, more traditional play therapy
sure.
materials, which I also have. But, just there was a space of having to lean into some creativity and kind of going a little rogue, like, this feels good to me. Let me see how it works.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I love that, that you're able to do that in private practice. Private practice
Exactly.
allows you to express that,
Yeah.
I think, in ways that not necessarily that an agency wouldn't allow you to, but
Mm-hmm.
it would be a challenge to sell,
Mm-hmm.
and a
Yep.
challenge to like raise the funds to set up the room in such a way.
Yeah, in a way, I think you're totally right. I think we're getting to a place where the science is really supporting it. And again, like this is not a one or the other. It's some kind of turf war about like what therapy is better, or it's just about different types of interventions, meeting kids at different spaces, and again, some of it's just temperament and personality. But I
Sure.
also feel like aside from, the aerial hammock, which I know we'll get to, aside from that, all the other things that I use in the room aren't, that unusual, that unique, that, expensive by any
Mhm.
means. I've had to work to set up my room in a way that's a little different from a traditional play therapist, somewhat for safety reasons
Sure.
um, and things like that. But otherwise, I think once the science is sort of explained to somebody, it makes a lot of sense, and most people are like, oh yeah, let's do that.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah,
Can you tell us a little bit about how you have set up the room? So, in thinking about logistics wise,
sure.
in a traditional office where other therapists are working around, what size did you have
Sure.
to obtain? I would think, given you need room to move, you need a little bit
Hmm.
of a larger space. Are there
Hmm.
any like extra physical structural elements that you had to consider in order to
Hmm.
accommodate some of the special things like the aerial swing that you mentioned?
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah. So I've I had two different offices during the time period in which I was really working this way. One was a little bit bigger. It was closer to probably 250 square feet. Um, it was really actually an ideal office in so many ways, and one of them was that I didn't really have any neighbors. Um, and we were on top of a daycare center, and so I
Perfect.
exactly. I mean, it really doesn't get more ideal. Like it just was relatively irrelevant how much noise I made or how much noise the kids made or, like a trampoline that was bouncing around or um but I did move then to another office after that, and it was a more kind of traditional setup. I was in we were in a house building
Okay.
that had 4 rooms. So it's 4 different offices in this little house. So more traditional, I had made, I shared walls and the waiting room was very close as opposed to my other office. It wasn't quite as close. And it was about 200 square feet. So, I mean, it's, if I was doing only adult therapy, you can get away with 100 square feet pretty
Yeah.
easily. I think it's hard to see kids in much less than 150, but still doable. I've had a 100 square foot
Mhm.
office and seen kids too. Um, so it is a little bit bigger than probably your average psychotherapist office, but it's not huge.
Mhm.
Um, and I had a colleague whose office was closer to about 150, and they were doing very similar work as well. So I think if you're, just aware of how you set things up, the
Right.
size is probably the least important piece. Um, but what I've always had is a pretty non-traditional setup. Again, like you don't walk into my office and see like shelves and open shelves of toys. When you would walk into my office, it looked like a pretty traditional adult psychotherapy office, honestly.
Okay.
So I had a couch, and I also did see adults when I worked in Austin, but I had a couch and I had shelves on different walls, but they had doors. So like I had like traditional Billy IKEA cabinets,
Okay. Yeah.
right? So I had really big tall ones and they had doors, and so they could open and close. And then I also had some Billy cabinets, short Billy cabinets that had I had custom curtains made for them, which was
Okay.
only so that they were the exact right size for the cabinets.
Yeah.
And so instead of doors, they just had curtains over them.
Nice.
So they looked clean and nice. And again, it could be appropriate for an adult, but also it was very low stimulation for my most dysregulated kids.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I know I have 3 offices in my
Mm-hmm.
space. One of them
Mm-hmm.
is set up more like it's a play-based space.
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
so I do have some of the open shelves and little bins
Yep.
with different miniatures
Yep.
and all that stuff. And for some kids, it is way too overstimulating.
Yeah.
So I'll take them into another room, which is
Yep.
more set up like an adult room. It doesn't
Yep.
have as much stimulation. And I'll just bring in the selection of
Yep.
items that we're going to be using, because
Yep.
you spend so much time just trying to contain, and
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
hard for them.
I'm a big fan of letting the environment do the containment and the boundary setting whenever possible, especially because I really identify as an attachment relational therapist. So as much as I can, again, let the environment set the boundary, the better. I used to kind of fantasize about having 2 separate offices, but honestly, the longer I practice, the more I don't want to have 2 separate offices because of just the lack of fluidity. Like I want to be able to, move in and out of whatever the kid wants to do in the moment.
Sure.
And in a lot of cases, my kids with complex trauma sort of progress through treatment where we'll start therapy with my room set up with all the doors are closed, the curtains are down. If they want to see, a lot of kids with complex trauma are, very suspicious and very cautious and very fear oriented. And so a lot of times their first visit to my office, we'd open up all the shelves. We'd like see what's underneath the curtains, like everything's back here. But I really found that as long as they knew what was behind all the closed curtains and doors, then I could just close the curtains and doors back up. And the environment provided the containment. I worked with the most dysregulated kids really in the city. So people are like, really, the curtains kept them out of there? And I'm like, yeah, it did. I don't know. I don't know the magic to that. And then I did have my
the other
sensory
movement things.
Yeah. Well, again, because the sensory stuff is a lot harder to quote unquote hide just because it's bigger. So I have a mini trampoline and it was just kind of in the corner. And so it was pretty challenging to get to just logistically. So it's something I really had to go and pull out if we were going to use. And I use a lot of Lycra, and I have like just baskets where I put a lot of the sensory stuff in. So they were very easily accessible, but they weren't necessarily all over the place. And then, as I got to know children, I might set the room up differently as they came in, like I might make sure the trampoline was out. I might, have things more available so it could look more child-led as opposed to me picking and choosing.
Sure.
And then what I found was that as we progressed through treatment, eventually the children would move into more kind of traditional child-centered approaches, or they'd start building symbolic sand trays, or they'd start doing more metaphor-based play, as they got more regulated, as their sense of self grew. And then what I could do, like before that particular client arrived, I just open up all my cabinets and flip up all my curtains. It took like 10 seconds for me to kind of transition into, again, still not a traditional child-centered room, but pretty close, right? Like all the things were there. They're easily accessible. You could see all of them. And then if the next child was a more, dysregulated kid where I was doing more of the movement or more of the sensory play or theraplay, which doesn't use toys, I would just close the doors and flop the curtains down. So it took like 15 minutes or 15 seconds to transition.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Very cool.
And it took a while, of course, to sort of figure that all out and find the groove, but that's ultimately what I landed on that worked really well.
Okay.
Yeah.
And so, can you tell me about what inspired you to bring the yoga hammock into the space and how you utilize that with clients?
Sure. So when I got introduced to the yoga hammock, I'd already been, I'd already known about Perry's work. I'd already been doing other movement kind of things. I'd already been, really working at kind of that lower brain rhythmic repetitive stuff. And in my personal life, like I met a woman in Austin who founded, her company was called Yogapeutics. And she was an occupational therapist and yoga instructor, and developed this really amazing space where she taught kids aerial yoga but also incorporated things like mindfulness and growth mindset and self-compassion. So she was just doing this really, really cool work with kids,
Awesome.
but not necessarily kids with special needs. And so I wanted to check it out, and my son was super interested. He was probably about 8 at the time, or maybe 7. He was really interested. We looked at it online. And so he was part-time homeschooled at the time. And so we had some days where we had nothing on this, he didn't have school. And so we went and took just like a semi-private, like just me and him session.
Nice.
And I mean, it's really not an exaggeration to say, like, so the area yoga hammock is 9 feet of fabric, but it's suspended from a single point in the air. So it looks kind of like a teardrop. And it's very low to the ground. And so like the moment I sat in it fully and then like lifted my feet up, so I was totally off the ground and just, held by the hammock, I mean, immediately I was like, I have to have one of these in my office. Like the kids I work with need this experience of, their entire bodies being held. And the proprioception that the fabric and what Lycra can about, how their bodies come into contact with the world, and the sense of weightlessness and like almost a sense of like safety and trust and ease, like I can relax into something that I know is going to support me. And for kids with complex trauma, like finding a way to create this experiential thing of relax, of trust, of being held, like all these things that are more energetic or more emotional when we talk about attachment, like quote unquote being held by the relationship, right? Well, the hammock created this actual experience of being totally held, and then all the proprioception, and the, it's a swing, so it moves and it rocks, and then we start to move into the rhythmic, repetitive, relational, somatosensory stuff that could happen. But mostly in the moment, I was just like, I have to have one of these. I'm not entirely sure why, and I don't know how I'm going to use it, but I have to have one. So I developed a sweet little relationship with Lindsay, the owner of Yogapeutics, and she was very encouraging, and from a very practical perspective, helped connecting me up with the professional engineer that hung it for her studio.
Nice.
I was going to do something way outside the box. And while I feel really confident, there's like yoga hammocks are so close to the ground. And because I work one-on-one with kids and their parents are almost always in the room too, I'm really not worried about the safety piece. But because it was so new and kind of outside the box, I wanted to make sure I did all the safety stuff, like
of course,
to the T. So I did hire a professional to come in. I mean, I had to, of course, when we moved to the office that I described, where there was the 4 of us in the building, all of us worked with kids with complex trauma, and my landlord was just an angel sent from above, for real. Like you hear the landlord horror stories.
Yes.
And he was just, this man who owned the building and rented it to us. And I asked him, like, hey, would you let me do this? It involves going up into the ceiling and hanging like I don't even know what, between 2 beams. And he's like, sure. So, I mean, he really didn't even blink an eye at it. I think, he was so wonderful, but I think he also really kind of quietly loved the work that we did with kids.
Yeah.
So he was just real flexible, and I was like, we have to cut through the ceiling and install like something between the beams. He's like, that's fine. So I recognize I got kind of lucky there. Not every landlord is going to kind of give you a free for all with that. But yeah, so I just hired a contractor to come in. He cut open my ceiling, he hung it, and hung there was an eye hook that poked through the ceiling. And I remember asking him once, like, so what's my weight restrictions here? And he's like, well, you could probably hang a semi truck from it. I said, okay, I think we're good.
Wow. Okay.
And
That's
so, of
cool.
course, parents would, well, I do a lot of work with parents and kids together, and parents would get in the hammock too. And that was always their first question, like, will it support me? I was like, he told me it would support a semi truck. They're okay. So, and he really said that. So it was just a fun little way to reassure people,
Mm-hmm.
that it was safe. So I actually hung the hammock before I really had any real training in how to use it, kind of, period.
Mm-hmm.
Which, when I did this 4 or 5 years ago, was a little bit outside my normal kind of MO. That's something I would totally do now. After, like, I'm like, yeah, let's just figure it out. But 4 or 5 years ago, I was a lot more cautious and really wanted things figured out before I actually did them.
Mm-hmm.
But for some reason, the hammock, and maybe it was just the movements of the just all the inherent properties of the hammock in general,
Yeah.
really inspired me to just be like, hey, let's just try. And so for about a year, I'd say it was kind of a combination of me just witnessing and being with kids and seeing what they did with it. And then I did go and take, like, the Yogapeutics aerial yoga teacher training course. And that helped give me a lot of specifics and safety stuff, and how to help kids get in and out of poses, and how to cue them. And because she was an occupational therapist, I got to learn even more about the body. And then I used the hammock myself, right? Like, I had to be able to, all the stuff I was going to teach kids how to do, I had to be able to do all that stuff myself.
So cool.
Yeah, so kind of, both of just being with it and exploring and watching and witnessing, and also a little bit of formal
Mm-hmm.
training.
I love hearing you describe the experience and
Uh-huh.
how, and earlier when you were talking about how it holds people, right?
Yeah.
Just the
Yeah.
whole metaphor, and
Yeah.
it just so translates to the
Yeah.
attachment work. It's
Mm-hmm.
like symbiotic.
Yeah.
You're you're recreating that
Yep.
experience, especially if you're talking about kids that had in utero trauma,
Right.
and how that can really be a reparative experience. Being in that
Yeah.
mirrors the same process, the
Yes.
weightlessness,
Yep.
the support, the containment, all of it. Just so
Yeah.
cool. Um, and at first, when I heard of it, I was like, wow, that is so cool. I have no idea how she's using it.
Uh-huh.
But now that in hearing you talk about it, it just seems like, why doesn't everybody have this?
Well, I hope one day more and more people do. I mean, that's certainly a goal I have, is to bring it. In the past year, I've started doing my own more personal aerial silks training and aerial hammock training. And so I have definitely some goals about, I'd like to I do a ton of movement training for therapists, but I really don't train about the hammock, somewhat because it's extremely impractical. Very few people have access to that. I
Right.
also don't have a studio, although that's probably going to change soon, where I could host a training where there would be hammocks there. Like, that's just not something I'd had access to before.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but that's definitely a goal I have, is because I do think just like you said, it makes so much sense. But the other piece of this that, people listening to us can't see us, is that we are, like, laughing and giggling and smiling, and you can't help but do that in the hammock. And it looks hard. Like, when I introduce it to kids and I show them, like, this cute little pose they could do, they have this moment of, like, there's no way I can do this, but it's actually really not that hard. And part of it's because of it's so held, and it gives
Yeah.
so much feedback to the body
Mm-hmm.
that it's actually not that hard. And so then there's this whole element of, like, oh my gosh, I can do this. This is so
Mm-hmm.
cool. Look what I can do. And so then we bring in, like, mastery and competency. And then anything that brings fun and delight into the therapy for me is kind of a no-brainer. And the hammock does instantly. instantly, like in a way I've never really seen anything else be so instantly delightful to people.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I imagine it really helps with resistance
Mhm.
too.
Yeah. Well, I mean, what we're doing is supporting the sensory system in a way I haven't yet found to do inside a psychotherapy office. And so
Mhm.
that supports the regulatory system
Mhm.
and increases safety. And so of course we're going to see, quote unquote resistance,
Yeah.
decrease. Yeah,
So
I know. So
cool.
fun.
So cool.
Yeah.
If listeners were interested in
Uh-huh.
doing something like this in
Yep.
their practice, what
Yep.
are a few tips or suggestions that you believe would be like good for them in terms of where to start to go through that process?
Sure. Well, from like, it's again, some of being practical and thinking about what people have access to, the like aerial yoga, silks, they're actually getting more and more common.
Mhm.
I would say I'm a real big believer of don't bring anything into your therapy space that you don't have a felt sense for what the experience is like. And so I'd say, like, regardless of your physical capabilities in any way, shape, or form, because that's another wonderful thing actually about the hammock is you don't really have to have any. Go and experience, like, go take a class, go find a aerial gym or a place that has aerial yoga. And again, it's getting more and more common. It's not as weird as it was 5 years ago.
Yep.
So go take a class, like go take a lesson, go take a private lesson, and just see, like, what does this feel like? Is this something I'm actually interested in?
Mhm.
And then I again, like, I'm a real big believer in, like, be safe, use your skills, and then just try things. Um, See, you don't have to drill a hole in your ceiling to use a hammock. You can buy like a rig or a stand. They
Mhm.
take up a lot of space. So you would need a pretty big space for that. Um, but I always direct people back to Yogapeutics, which is in Austin, Texas.
Mhm.
She does local trainings. She travels for trainings. I mean, she's really been part of the national movement of kids aerial yoga. Um, and she's just a brilliant occupational therapist too, and just speaks therapy.
Well, I
Um,
think we should definitely add the website for her and the contact
yeah.
information in the show notes for listeners to check out if they want more information
Yep.
on it. She sounds like a great resource.
Yeah. She is a great resource. She offers great trainings. There's a lot of great information on her website. She sells hammocks to parents and anybody who buys them. And so she even has instructions on her website about, like, how to go about hanging a hammock. So she's a pretty
Awesome.
phenomenal phenomenal resource. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, we'll definitely add that website to the show
Yeah.
notes so people can
Yep.
get there.
Yep.
Um, any other tips besides like immersing yourself and trying it out yourself and learning about the new tool that you're considering, whether it's an aerial hammock or any other different aspect of modality or piece of equipment that you're adding to the therapy room?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's almost like this, like, yin yang, right brain, left brain thing. Like, let's be practical, like, learn about it, be safe, be realistic. Again, I'm not overly worried about safety because it's just me and this one kid. I don't have a huge OT gym. I'm not running a group of 8 kids. I'm not, I've got me and this one kid, and usually I've got their parent too. Um, I do have parents sign, quote unquote informed consent about, like, using the sensory equipment. I've never had anybody even blink an eye at it.
Mm-hmm.
But it's offering somebody some sort of informed consent is also a way to just have a conversation. Yeah.
Yeah.
Introduce them to the idea. This is why I do this. This is, what the benefits are. Of it. So I think that's a good idea to also incorporate in some way, is just some sort of consent process for, working with kids in a little bit different capacity. But yeah, like learn, try, right? This like kind of back and forth between like get the left brain information and then go and do it in real life, and then get more information and then go do it.
Yeah, I I think we should be going out and experimenting and bringing
Yeah.
different things in. Um, it makes
Yeah.
it fun for us and keeps
Yes.
us engaged, which is really important.
Yeah.
I think no matter what profession you're in, after a while, even though, I think most of us know we don't know everything that we need to know
Uh-huh.
to do our
Right.
jobs. We're always learning,
Right.
which is great, but it can get a little redundant. And in order to keep it
Mm-hmm.
fresh, it's exciting to bring new things in. And I think that's exciting for the clients too,
Yeah. Yeah. Yep.
them engaged. And
Yep.
so,
I completely agree.
how do you, I know we just talked about the informed consent being
Mm-hmm.
one of the ways that you help educate the parents on what you're doing. Is there anything
Yeah.
specific that you really talk to them to help them to understand why this holds the therapeutic benefit for the child? Because I know for a
Sure.
lot of expressive based or non-talk based therapies, there
Mm-hmm.
can be pressure from people because they don't necessarily understand, because they're not as
Mm-hmm.
familiar. I mean, most of the examples we see
Right.
in society are the old-fashioned talk-based
Right.
therapies, and
Right.
not
Right.
necessarily using movement or art or music or dance.
Right.
How do you go about helping them to see the therapeutic benefit of what you're doing?
Yeah. Well, I think the very first and most important thing that I do is I'm highly engaged and interactive with parents throughout the entire therapy process. And so, um, in a way that parents who've had their kids in other therapy before report being different than their typical experience in therapy. So I am like extensively partnering and connecting with parents from the very get-go, like from my, intake process, my assessment process, and almost always am doing family therapy. It is definitely more typical for me to have a parent and or a child and at least one parent, if not two parents in the room, than for me to just have a child in the room.
Okay.
I do occasionally do individual therapy, but it is not my norm. And so, in most ways, I think that sort of takes care of the quote unquote explanation, because there's just so much more relational connection. There's so much more trust. They're seeing it happen.
It
And so it's not a
demystifies it.
mystery.
Yeah.
Exactly. Um, but in addition to that, I definitely, in my first appointment with parents, it's 2 hours long, and about half of it is like developmental history and learning about the child and current symptoms and all that kind of good stuff, normal developmental intake. And then I'd say probably about another half of it is talking about complex trauma, because almost every kid I see has a history of complex trauma. So educating just about the impact of complex trauma, educating about, the impact on the brain and how that translates to behaviors, and really helping to, in most circumstances, helping parents de-shame themselves, that they're failures at parents, or that they're doing something wrong, or, you know, um, de-shame their children, who sometimes have really strange, bizarre behaviors that they cannot figure out at all.
Yeah.
Um, and so I do so much, I think, simple, clear explanation of what's going on. And then I talk about, and so since that's what's going on, this is what we're going to do to try to help fix it. Um, and the other piece of the rhythmic, relational, repetitive somatosensory work that Dr. Perry is so clear about is that this doesn't occur for 50 minutes a week and expect us to get changes in a kid,
Right.
right? Like I work with parents to create those, like they make their whole world like that.
Mm,
And so part of my work with families isn't just the work in the room, but supporting parents of like, okay, so how do you bring this into your life? What do we need to change about your home or about the family or about school or about your patterns or whatever, so that the child's getting rich, rhythmic, repetitive, relational, somatosensory experiences throughout their week, not just 1 hour a week.
Yes.
So that is, of course, I mean, buy-in is hardly even the right word. It doesn't feel like buy-in. It feels like we connect and we go on this journey together.
You're giving them the tools to be able to facilitate that process with their child and do that reparative work within the parent-child dynamic, which is a really beautiful thing.
Yeah. So honestly, I don't get a whole lot of parent resistance or parent skepticism. I get normal, like, frustration, dysregulation during the weeks where, like, there's been a particularly bad behavior, like, oh my gosh, when are you going to fix this? And when are you going to fix this problem? I get, of course we are. Like, some of these kids have really scary, dangerous behaviors.
Right.
But I don't get a whole lot of, like, why are you doing this? Why aren't you talking? And I think that's because of the way, like, I partner with them and make them such a part of the process.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Very, very good stuff. And I think
very fun stuff for sure.
Yeah, fun too. And I think a lot of listeners could benefit from that, that integrating the parents into the work too. So I know you had mentioned that part of what you're doing is training. And if therapists were interested in training with you, where would we find that information out?
Well, my website is my last name, Gobbel, Gobbel, counseling.com. And so I do live in-person trainings. I travel to give trainings. Oftentimes people call and say, hey, can you bring that training to our city? I was like, sure. So you can see kind of where I'm going or where I'll be, or you could call me and say, hey, would you bring that training to my city? And we'll try to work it out. I do some online trainings too. They're different because we can't, of course, be as experiential.
Right.
But I do a lot of webinars, and I do consultation with therapists, individual and group. And I plan to really keep building that part. This is Wonderful. Such a fun way to work with kids, and I love bringing it to other therapists. So my website, and then I do have a Facebook page, I have an Instagram page, I'm pretty active on both. So you can keep up with what I'm doing and where I am through those places.
And so anything coming up soon?
So as we're recording, I have one more Chicago-based training it's still 2 months away. It's been sold out for, I don't know, weeks already.
Wow, that's wonderful.
And then I just have a bunch in the pipeline. So I'm, I have about 2 weeks to get through here. And then I can start thinking about, okay, let's start solidifying 2020 dates. I've had a lot of inquiries and a lot of places in the works, but nothing officially launched yet for 2020. Though by the time this airs,
yes,
I may be able to give you a list of what's running.
That would be wonderful. And then we can add that too. And I'll add your website so that people can go there and keep up that way too.
Yeah.
To the show notes.
Sounds great.
Is there anything else that you'd like to add today that you think the listeners might benefit from? Any other products or services or tips?
Yeah, I mean, what came to me when you said that was just like kind of going back to where we first started, which is when I go and when I teach this movement training I open it with, like, I'm going to give you a ton of tips and tricks, and I develop some resources and like all these activities you can do, but I want you to understand, like, I've made all of this up. Like, and that's what I want you to do too. Like, I want you to, allow what I'm teaching you to put the theory into practicality. And then I want you to go and do it, because it's easier to try something new if somebody kind of spoon feeds it to you and tells you what to do. And then I want you to remember that there's nothing magical about these particular activities that I've come up with, or these particular ways I've put them together. Like, they've just worked for me, or they've been co-created by me and this client that I had in the room and face-to-face with me. You know, like these are just springboards for you to understand the theory, see how it works, and then, oh my gosh, the sky's the limit. Like, use your creativity, be in the moment with these kids, and feel confident in that part of the work. That's way more important than the, like, let's jump on the trampoline, let's use an aerial yoga hammock. Like, that's not what heals kids, right?
No.
Yeah.
That goes back to the relationship piece, right? And the attachment. But I love it. I love the inspiration, encouraging other people to try things on and experiment, that we don't have to follow a logical sequential order of operations all the time to achieve therapeutic outcomes, because the work really happens in relationship between the therapist and the client. But these other things can help hold that relationship and facilitate that relationship. And and so that's helpful. Well, I'm so grateful for you taking your time out of your day today.
It's been really fun
to speak with me about all that you've been doing.
Thanks for listening to this episode of The Creative Psychotherapist. If you like what you heard, please rate, review, and subscribe wherever you listen to your favorite podcasts. For show notes, downloads, and additional resources, head over to the website at www.creativeclinicianscorner.com.